My name is Jenna, and I've been married for 3 years now at the age of 30. My husband, Seth, who's 32, works at his family business. His family owns a wholesale liquor company where his father is the president and Seth serves as the director. Ever since we got married, I've been working there as well as an office clerk. My mother-in-law has never involved herself with the family business, having been a stay-at-home mom for the longest time. And when I say stay at home, she used to employ a housekeeper, so she never really had to lift a finger. When I married into the family and started living with my in-laws, they let the housekeeper go. Why would we need a housekeeper when we've got a daughter-in-law? My mother-in-law remarked, and both my father-in-law and husband seemed to agree with her. It seems my father-in-law, who has taken into his wife's family, has never been able to stand up to his wife. Growing up, Seth saw his father always obeying his mother's commands. It's as if he believes that obeying every word is the natural order of things. Even when we visited for the first time before we got married, it was evident that she was the one who ruled the house. Since becoming a part of this family, I've been burdened with both housework and office work. The alcohol wholesale business has been in a tight spot lately, and we can't afford to hire more staff, so I've been lending a hand. They had to let the housekeeper go because the money to pay her was running out. Nevertheless, this company, which has been around since my husband's grandfather's time, manages to keep going thanks to long-standing business relationships. The grandfather founded the company in his lifetime and expanded it to its current scale. There are about 10 employees who handle sales and deliveries, even delivering quite far away. The grandfather, having no son of his own, had my father-in-law, who was a promising employee, take over the business. He arranged for my father-in-law to marry his only daughter and entrusted the company to them. I never met this grandfather myself, but apparently he was a stern man. Dad is a patient man, Seth often says, praising his father. He never got angry, no matter what was said to him. Grandpa was pretty stern, but Mom is even more so. Seth, who accepts whatever his mom tells him, talks about it as if it's someone else's business. Until we got married and started living together, I couldn't have imagined this side of Seth. While we were dating, he seemed like a bit of a wild one, but at home, he becomes almost invisible. He's also lively and energetic at work, but turns quiet as soon as he gets home. The same is true for my father-in-law, who's bustling at the company, but becomes as quiet as a church mouse at home. I was shocked at first by their transformation, but now I find myself in the same boat. In this house, my mother-in-law is the absolute authority, and no one dares to defy her. When we first started living together, she made a huge fuss because she didn't like the food I made. The dinner I made casually was apparently too spicy for her, and she tossed it into the trash after just one bite. In a panic, I quickly apologized. "I'm sorry, was it too spicy?" My mother-in-law made me stand before her and began her lecture. "Are you trying to make me sick by making me eat something this spicy?" I was petrified by the sight of my mother-in-law's face, which looked like a demon. Seth and my father-in-law stopped eating their meals and sat rigidly, their eyes cast downwards. When I cast a fleeting glance at them for help, I saw Seth's face, even paler than mine. When I looked at my father-in-law, he too had a pale face, just like Seth. From their expressions, I could imagine how terrifying my mother-in-law's lectures were. After enduring more than 30 minutes of my mother-in-law's sermon, I had forgotten why she was angry in the first place. Even my angry mother-in-law seemed to have gotten hungry and ended up eating the meals I made. Seth and my father-in-law have always lived with my mother-in-law, so they've learned to live quietly at home. That's when I started to regret marrying into such a formidable family. When my mother-in-law was a young adult, her father's company was at its peak. An employee who had just been working for the company for a long time spoke nostalgically about it when he was retiring. Apparently, they had more than double the number of employees they have now, and their sales were incomparably higher. My mother-in-law had experienced this prosperous era and finds it hard to lower her standard of living. That's probably why she used to hire a housekeeper and never did any household chores herself. My mother-in-law loves shopping and often goes out, bringing back loads of things. I don't know how much money she spends, but given the company's current performance, it's starting to worry me. Seth and my father-in-law don't say anything about her shopping, so I keep my mouth shut too. If I made an ill-considered comment, I might get a lecture that lasts longer than 30 minutes. Before I knew it, I had started to think like Seth and my father-in-law. For about a year after our marriage, I was fully occupied trying to get used to the lifestyle in my husband's family and the work at the company. By the time 2 years had passed, I was facing a bigger problem. We were unable to have a child. Particularly, in my mother-in-law's mind, was her experience of not having a son in her father's generation and having to take in a son-in-law. She worries that the same thing should not happen in Seth's generation. As we approached our 3rd year of marriage, she started to make sarcastic comments every chance she got. "When are you going to give us an heir? You didn't marry into this family to be an office clerk." Even the sight of a baby on TV would set her off. "There are so many babies in the world. Why don't we have one here?" She'd glare at me. Seth and my father-in-law would disappear whenever this topic started. Hearing this day after day, I began to feel there was no place for me in this family. I wished Seth would help. But no matter how many times I confided in him, he'd say, "Don't worry about it, just let it go." As if he didn't want to be involved. At the same time, the company's situation was deteriorating. My father-in-law's company, with its old-fashioned business style, was unable to get work from trendy eateries and the like. My mother-in-law seemed to sense this, even though Seth and my father-in-law didn't talk about it with her. Still, she couldn't stop her favorite activity, shopping, and brought home all sorts of things. Whether she was angry at herself, I don't know, but she'd come home from shopping in a bad mood. Then her anger would be directed at me. "It's Jenna's fault for not producing an heir. That's why I end up buying unnecessary things." My mother-in-law, who blamed me for incomprehensible reasons, seemed to pin all the blame on me. Perhaps because of her daily grumbles, my health started to fail. I asked Seth and my father-in-law to let me take a break from work and got tested at the hospital. Seth seemed hopeful that I might be pregnant, but it was due to stress. It would be best to rest a little in a relaxing environment. But there was no relaxing environment for me at present. Nor could I afford to rest. Knowing it was impossible, I explained the situation to Seth and my in-laws when I got home. The doctor said it would be better if I could rest a little, but it's okay. Surprisingly, my mother-in-law said, "You should go back to your parents' house and rest for a while." She even told my father-in-law, "We can manage, right? It seems like we're not so busy right now." It seemed like she was urging them to let me take a break from work. My father-in-law, surprised by my mother-in-law's words, replied, "We can cover for you. It's okay," with a relieved look on his face. I was shocked by my mother-in-law's unexpected words. At this time, I thought she might actually be a kind person. But that was a big mistake. She was just a person with a bad temper after all. The next day, I went back to my parents' house right away to rest. When I told them on the phone that I was coming back, they seemed very worried. When my mother saw me in person, she said, "You look pale and thin. Haven't you lost weight?" she asked with a voice on the verge of tears. "First, take some rest and recover." My father also welcomed me. He seemed to understand everything from my expression. He must have understood that things weren't going well with my in-laws because stress was the cause. I felt bad for worrying my parents by coming back home. My health improved quickly after I returned to my parents' house. Clearly, the environment at my in-laws' house was the cause of stress. About a week after I arrived at my parents' house, my in-laws suddenly showed up. I could understand if my husband Seth showed up, but I never thought my in-laws would come to my parents' house. My mother-in-law suddenly started yelling as soon as she arrived. "We're returning this good-for-nothing daughter-in-law who can't even bear an heir. It's up to the parents to take responsibility." Even my mother, who met her at the door, was too surprised to respond. My father rushed to the entrance and challenged her. "I can't let it go if you call my daughter a failure." "What do you mean?" My mother-in-law fought back when my father immediately rebutted her. 3 years into marriage and still no baby. What's more, she's weak and can't work." My mother, finally regaining her composure, counterattacked. "Isn't Seth also responsible for not having a child?" My mother-in-law dismissed her with a snort, making baseless excuses. "There's nothing wrong with Seth. The problem lies with your daughter." My father, maintaining his composure against my mother-in-law's unreasonable remarks, said, "If you insist on that, we'll take our daughter back. Are you fine with Jenna leaving?" I, who didn't want to face my mother-in-law, was watching the situation from a place where they couldn't see me. My father glanced at me for confirmation. The image of Seth flashed in my mind, but I nodded. Seth hasn't visited me once since I came back home, and he can't stand up against his mother's remarks. There's a limit to calling someone a failure or trying to return them like some defective product. "From now on, we'll have no relation with you. Please remember that," my father responded very politely. My father-in-law, hiding behind my mother-in-law, seemed like he wanted to say something. However, my mother-in-law cut him off. "We'll send the failure of a daughter-in-law's luggage later. We'll hire a divorce lawyer too." With that, my in-laws, who glared at my parents, left. "Why didn't you say something more to such rude remarks?" My mother, this time, turned on my father. Calming her down, he said, "There's no use talking to that woman. Don't worry. We'll make her realize her mistake through our actions, not words." My mother, not understanding what my father meant, was still furious. I, however, understood immediately. My father-in-law also knew, which is why he tried to say something. My father runs a restaurant chain and has a business relationship with my father-in-law's company. As someone who used to work in administration, I knew this. In fact, it was my father who introduced me to Seth. He had been doing business with my father-in-law's company since the time my grandfather-in-law was the president. My father's company, which started from a single store and struggled at first, received help from my grandfather-in-law. To this day, with a significantly larger number of stores, he procures all the alcohol and beverages from my father-in-law's company. To be honest, it seems cheaper to source from elsewhere, but they continue trading out of gratitude to my grandfather-in-law. Given that my father's company also runs an affiliated pub, it's a big account for my father-in-law's company. My mother-in-law, who didn't know about this, was able to maintain her attitude towards my father. The next day, my father called my father-in-law's company and told the person in charge, "We're ending all transactions with you." The flustered person in charge immediately reported to my father-in-law and Seth. My father-in-law, who had not anticipated that all transactions would be stopped, finally lost his temper with my mother-in-law. "Because of you, we have lost a major business deal." The normally gentle father-in-law's fury and the loss of a major deal seemed to have shocked my mother-in-law. "What? It's because of me?" My father-in-law explained to my mother-in-law that I am the daughter of a major client. When Seth and I got married, this was brought up, and my father-in-law thought my mother-in-law remembered it. She, who didn't care about business, had completely forgotten and only then remembered. "Now that you mention it, I vaguely recall something about it when Seth was getting married." Finally, grasping the severity of the situation, my mother-in-law was flustered. Seth also lashed out at her. "What were you thinking? Deciding on Jenna and my divorce on your own?" I had reported to Seth about my mother-in-law demanding a divorce from me. "I don't want a divorce. Moreover, if things continue this way, our company will collapse." Given that my father's company is a large client and profitable, if the transactions stop, they wouldn't be able to manage the business. Presently, all trading partners are demanding lower prices and they're hardly making any profit. My father's company, due to the relationship between my grandfather-in-law and my father, hadn't requested any price reduction. Such a relationship of trust seemed to be the only reason why my father introduced Seth to me. That evening, my in-laws and Seth came to my parents' house, but my father did not allow them inside. At the door, my father asked, "After all the disrespect, what brings you here today?" His anger was evident, as my father-in-law apologized from the bottom of his heart and pleaded, "We are sorry for our behavior yesterday. Could we ask you to reconsider our trade relationship?" Despite his plea, my father didn't seem to lend an ear. "We were trading out of respect for the former president. But let's end it now," my father said. And my father-in-law apologized over and over again. Then, turning to Seth and my mother-in-law, he said, "You two should apologize as well." Prompted by my father-in-law, both seemed unwilling. Moreover, my mother-in-law stated, Why do we have to go this far? Let's just give up and find another trading partner. Expressing her refusal to prostrate, Seth also followed suit. There's no need for us to apologize, as Mom said. They wouldn't listen to my father-in-law. Seeing Seth's attitude, my father became even angrier. Seth, I am disappointed in you. Why didn't you defend my daughter? At my father's words, Seth couldn't respond and kept his gaze low. Because you always do whatever my mother-in-law says. I've been suffering. Without thinking, I rushed to the entrance and finally voiced my feelings towards Seth. Seth tried to speak, but watching my mother-in-law's facial expression, he couldn't say anything. Seeing him like this, I decided that divorce was the only option. Until now, I thought we might be able to mend things, but even that tiny hope vanished completely. I'll pick up my belongings later, I told Seth clearly. My mother-in-law didn't seem to like this attitude of mine and started making a fuss. Yes, that's right. Seth needs to get a divorce from you quickly and find a new bride. My mother-in-law, who had come to apologize, started to badmouth me again. This time we'll get a bride who isn't a failure and can give us a successor. With that, she loudly walked out of our house alone. Seth immediately followed her. My father-in-law, who was left behind, was urged by my father to stop apologizing. I've made my decision. I'm going to close the company and leave the house. Surprising both my father and me. Is your business situation that bad? My father asked, and my father-in-law responded with a bitter smile. I've been considering closing down the company for a few years now, due to continued losses. While I knew their situation was tough, I didn't think it was that serious. I worked hard to leave the company to my son, but it was all in vain with him behaving like this, hunching his back as he left. The next day, when I went to pick up my stuff from my in-laws' house, nobody was there. As I was moving my belongings and about to show up at the company, I found a great uproar. Creditors who heard rumors of the bankruptcy were swarming, and my father-in-law and Seth were handling them. I left without greeting anyone. A few days later, my father-in-law's company declared bankruptcy. My mother-in-law, who had a large amount of debt, filed for personal bankruptcy and ran away with Seth. It seems Seth intends to follow his mother wherever she goes. My father-in-law is looking for re-employment for the remaining employees. I wish Seth could have thought about the employees until the end like his father did. Back home for a rest. I became well again. I never thought I would get a divorce during my convalescence. Seeing me depressed after the divorce, a friend who was worried about me introduced me to a man. This man, who has firm beliefs, captivated me. After about a year of dating, we got married, and we were blessed with a baby. When I got pregnant easily, something I had been hoping for so long. I thought the problem must have been with Seth. Now I can laugh about it. But at the same time, I was so troubled that it affected my health. Perhaps a peaceful environment was good for me. In any case, now I can't wait for the arrival of our baby.